Daniel Carter was deep into a high-stakes investigation when a plain envelope arrived. No return address, just 6 chilling words. Stop digging, or your piece ends. Before he could react, his retired canine partner Rex let out a guttural growl and bolted into the storm. What Daniel found next would shatter his world. His mother, tied and trembling inside her own home, a target in a game far more dangerous than he imagined. The criminals thought they could silence him with fear, but they didn't count on a dog's loyalty or a son's love. What happened next will move you to tears and renew your faith in divine protection. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story of loyalty and miracles can reach. The city of Denver, Colorado, wore a restless coat of midnight rain. Wind rattled the empty streets, and the glow of amber street lamps blurred in the slick reflections pooling on the pavement. The police precinct, a square brick building darkened by years of weather and work, hummed faintly with the sound of fluorescent lights and the distant patter of rain against glass. It was late, well past the hour most officers had gone home. Only a handful of desks still burned with the dim light of task lamps, their owners long gone, leaving behind paperwork and the stale scent of coffee. Detective Daniel Carter leaned over his desk, shoulders slightly hunched, fatigue etched into the lines around his gray eyes. At 38, Daniel carried himself with the quiet steadiness of a man who had been shaped by hardship and tempered by discipline. His frame was lean but strong, dressed in a dark navy shirt rolled at the sleeves, his badge clipped neatly to his belt. His short brown hair, dusted with faint streaks of gray at the temples, glistened under the desk lamp's glow. Daniel was known at the precinct for his integrity, an officer who could not be bought, a man who listened before he spoke, and one who carried the invisible weight of every victim he had ever sworn to protect. Years earlier, he had lost his father suddenly to illness, leaving his mother, Margaret Carter, to raise him alone. That loss had forged in him a fierce loyalty to his mother and a distrust of anything false or fleeting. This night, though, his focus was on a sprawling case file spread across his desk. Photographs, transcripts, and coded reports formed a map of connections tied to an illegal weapons smuggling ring. The evidence was growing, and Daniel knew he was closer than ever to pulling back the curtain on a network of dangerous men. His pencil tapped steadily on the paper, but his thoughts were taut, as if the room itself was holding its breath. From the corner of the office, a low growl rumbled. Daniel turned his head slightly and saw his partner, Rex, lying stretched across the rug near the door. Rex was a German shepherd, 9 years old, with a sable coat streaked with silver and a single bent ear that gave him a weathered, almost battle-hardened appearance. His right hind leg bore the faint white scars of an injury sustained years earlier in the line of duty, yet his eyes, deep brown and alert, still gleamed with the sharpness of a guardian. Rex had been Daniel's canine partner since his early days in the unit. More than a partner, the dog was family. Trained with precision, loyal beyond doubt, Rex's instincts often seemed to surpass human reason. Though he was aging, his presence alone radiated both comfort and vigilance, a reminder that some forms of courage did not need words. Daniel rubbed his eyes, pushing the folder away, when he noticed it. A plain envelope sat atop the file he had left closed only minutes ago. It hadn't been there before. No return address, no seal of officiality, just his name, Detective Carter, scrawled in sharp, uneven handwriting across the front. The paper was damp at the edges, as though it had been slipped inside with wet fingers. His stomach tightened. He tore the envelope open carefully and unfolded the single sheet inside. The message was short, printed in block letters that pressed hard into the paper. "Stop your investigation if you value your mother's peace. She won't be safe otherwise." Daniel's chest constricted, a cold weight pressing in against his ribs. He read it again, then a third time, though the words remained unchanged. His pulse thudded in his ears. The case had clearly cut too close to the core. They knew about Margaret. They knew she lived alone in a quiet suburb outside the city. 1,000 thoughts collided inside him. Anger, fear, disbelief. but the dominant note was dread. For his mother, for the woman who had given him everything, who had worked 3 jobs when his father died, who had never once asked for anything in return. Margaret Carter was 65, with hair as white as snowfall and eyes that no longer saw with the sharpness they once had. She was gentle, a retired schoolteacher who still baked pies for the neighborhood children on weekends. And now she was a target. Before Daniel could gather his thoughts, Rex's low growl deepened into a sharp bark. The dog had risen to his feet, muscles rigid, ears angled toward the door. His claws clicked against the tile as he moved, circling back toward Daniel, nudging his arm with insistence. Daniel stared at the letter once more, his hand tightening around it. He didn't need Rex's instincts to confirm what his gut already screamed. This was not a threat to be ignored. He had to act. Now. Rex barked again, louder, then pressed himself toward the office door, his body tense like a drawn bowstring. His head jerked once toward Daniel as if to say, "We don't have time, let's go." Daniel stood abruptly, chair scraping back across the floor. He swept the case file into a folder and shoved it into his drawer. Sliding the letter into his jacket pocket, he grabbed his coat from the rack. The precinct was silent, the storm outside louder than the few officers still in the building. "Come on, partner," Daniel muttered, his voice cracked with urgency. Rex bounded ahead, nails clicking in rhythm against the hallway tiles. Together, they pushed through the heavy glass doors into the storm. Rain pelted Daniel's face, drenching him in seconds. The air was sharp with the smell of wet asphalt and the faint metallic tang of danger. He had planned to sleep at his apartment tonight. Instead, he sprinted across the lot toward his patrol car, Rex leaping into the passenger seat with practiced ease. Daniel's hands shook as he jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. For a brief moment, he glanced at Rex. The dog's eyes were fixed on the dark horizon, unblinking, ears stiff. It was as though Rex knew where they needed to go, knew that Margaret's life might already be hanging by a thread. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel, breath steadying despite the storm that roared inside him. "Hold on, Mom," he whispered. "We're coming." With that, he hit the siren. The cruiser's red and blue lights slashed through the darkness as Daniel sped out of the city toward the small house where his mother lived alone. And Rex, the silent sentinel, sat poised beside him, growl fading into readiness, the loyal heartbeat of the night. Rain hammered the windshield with relentless fury, each droplet slashing sideways as if the night itself were trying to pull Daniel off course. The wipers danced furiously across the glass, but vision remained blurred, distorted by darkness and storm. Denver faded behind them as Daniel Carter gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white, eyes focused ahead though his thoughts spun inward. Rex paced in the back seat, his heavy paws thudding softly against the worn leather. The German shepherd let out a guttural growl that grew into a sharp bark every time the cruiser swerved toward the familiar stretch of road that would eventually lead them out of the city and into the quiet residential neighborhood where Margaret Carter lived alone. Daniel's jaw clenched as he sped through the deserted streets, headlights carving narrow tunnels of visibility. His breath fogged the glass, though the interior was cool. The memory of the letter still burned in his jacket pocket. He hadn't reread it. He didn't need to. Beside him, the digital radio crackled with static. He reached out instinctively to silence it, not wanting distractions. Rex barked again, 3 sharp bursts this time, as if in protest. Daniel glanced back briefly, meeting his dog's eyes in the rearview mirror. They were wide, fixed, alert. Rex wasn't barking at noise, he was barking at what wasn't there, at the silence that had replaced a sense of safety. The memory hit him like a punch to the chest. He was 12, sitting on the worn carpet in their old apartment, his knees scraped from a schoolyard fall. Margaret, her hair still dark then, her hands dusted in flour from the pie crust she'd been rolling, crouched down beside him. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't scold him for fighting. She simply looked him in the eye and said, "Justice matters, even when it costs you, but never forget who you're fighting for." That had stayed with him. It was why he joined the force. Not to make arrests, not for the badge, but because he believed in protecting the people who couldn't fight back. People like his mother. He shifted in his seat as the rain grew heavier. The trees outside blurred into jagged shadows, the roadside slick and uninviting. His phone buzzed in the cup holder, a message from Officer Mike. "Still at the station. Need backup?" Daniel ignored it. There was no time to explain. Rex growled again. This time, he lunged forward, front paws pressing against the center console, his claws scraping lightly. His body was rigid, tail low, a posture Daniel knew too well. Warning, not panic. Rex was reading something Daniel couldn't air pressure, scent, perhaps even dread. As the cruiser turned off the highway onto Havenwood Drive, a narrow residential stretch that wound its way up toward the hills, Daniel felt his stomach twist. Every house on the street sat in silence, lights off, windows drawn. It was late, true, but this was something more. The silence was too absolute. The world had pulled a blanket over its head and was holding its breath. Ahead, the familiar outline of Margaret's white clapboard house emerged through the downpour. The porch light was off. The curtains in the living room were closed. That alone would have been enough to make Daniel uneasy. His mother never left her porch light off, not when she knew he might call or drop by. She said it was the lighthouse in her little sea. He slowed the car as they approached the driveway. Rex let out a low, mournful sound, almost a whine, but with urgency laced beneath it. His body shifted again, pacing back and forth. Daniel pulled into the drive and killed the engine. The silence that followed felt unnatural. He reached for the flashlight tucked beneath the seat, then hesitated, instead unclipping his holstered weapon. Not because he expected a fight, but because instinct told him the storm outside was not the only threat tonight. Rex jumped out the moment the door opened, landing with a splash in the puddles that littered the walkway. Rain fell hard on Daniel's head and back, soaking his shirt in seconds. The gravel crunched underfoot as he followed Rex, flashlight in one hand, firearm in the other. They stopped at the porch. Rex sniffed the doorframe, tail low, hackles raised. Daniel tried the doorknob. Locked. That in itself was odd. His mother rarely locked the door before 10. She always said it made her feel like she was locking the world out, and she hated the thought of someone needing help and being turned away. Daniel moved along the edge of the porch, peering through the windows. The house was dark. No movement, no TV light, no familiar silhouette in the kitchen. Rex moved to the side, sniffing, circling back toward the fence. As Daniel rounded the back corner of the house, flashlight cutting through the downpour, another memory surged to the surface, an afternoon long ago, when he'd come home from school with a bruised eye and told his mother he didn't want to go back. She'd held his face and said, "Son, life doesn't let you run. You face it, one storm at a time." He took a breath and opened the side gate, following Rex toward the backyard. A motion light clicked on, sudden and blinding in the rain. Rex froze. Then he barked, loud, frantic, insistent. He ran up to the back door and began pawing at it. Daniel's heart jumped. He ran, slipped slightly on the slick stones, caught himself, and sprinted the final few feet. The door was ajar. He grabbed the knob and pushed. It creaked open with effort, the hinges resisting like they hadn't been used in years. The house inside was colder than it should have been. The scent hit him instantly damp wood, something metallic, and the unmistakable trace of fear. Rex entered first, nose low to the ground. Daniel followed, heart pounding against his ribs. They were inside, and the storm had just begun. The air inside the house was cold and stale, thick with the scent of damp wood and something metallic. Daniel stepped in slowly, his weapon drawn low, flashlight cutting through the murky shadows. Behind him, Rex moved with tense precision, shoulders low, ears twitching at every creak and whisper in the house's bones. The rain outside still hammered against the rooftop, but in here, the silence felt heavier than the storm. The living room, once warm with Margaret's knickknacks and floral throws, was in disarray. One of the armchairs lay on its side, its cushions half spilled. The floral curtains that had always gently swayed in the breeze now hung in tatters, one side ripped down completely. Daniel's flashlight passed over the coffee table where a ceramic teacup lay shattered, the tea long dried into a dark stain on the wood. No sign of forced entry, but something violent had happened here. Rex let out a low whine and sniffed the rug where one of Margaret's slippers had been left behind, tilted slightly, as though it had been kicked off in a hurry. Daniel's throat tightened. "Mom?" he called, his voice barely more than a whisper, but it echoed through the empty house like a shot. No response. Rex suddenly perked up, nose lifted, tail straight out. He sniffed rapidly, turning once in a circle before darting toward the hallway leading to the kitchen. Daniel followed, boots making soft thuds on the hardwood. The kitchen was cold, the back door ajar. A puddle of muddy footprints spread across the tile. One large set, heavy, male. Daniel crouched, examined the tracks. No effort to clean or hide them. Whoever had come in was confident or in a hurry. Then Rex froze near the pantry door, nose pressed to the baseboard. He scratched at it twice, then let out a low, short bark. Daniel looked closer and noticed a faint smear of red, dried blood on the bottom of the cabinet. Not enough to suggest a fatal wound, but enough to say someone had been hurt. Before he could react further, a rustling sound echoed from the backyard, just barely audible above the storm. Daniel stiffened, then glanced toward the window. Across the fence, behind the hedge, a curtain fluttered inside the neighboring house. It was the home of Mr. Harris. Walter Harris, 76, was a retired postal worker with a thin frame and back slightly hunched from years of carrying sacks. His white hair was combed neatly, even when he didn't plan on leaving the house, and he always wore suspenders over his shirt, no matter the temperature. A solitary man, since his wife passed away a decade ago, Harris kept to himself but was fiercely observant. He could tell the time by the sound of the garbage truck and often noted who came and went as a hobby more than suspicion. Daniel crossed the kitchen quickly and stepped out onto the porch, flashlight in hand. He waved it once toward the window across the yard. The curtain twitched. A moment later, a hesitant hand parted it, and Harris peeked out. His expression wrinkled with guilt and fear tightened when he recognized Daniel. The porch light flicked on. Daniel raised his voice slightly. "Mr. Harris, did you see anything tonight?" The older man opened the window slightly. His voice was gravelly, like the crunch of dry leaves. I heard some shouting earlier, maybe a half hour ago. Thought it was the television at first. Then I saw someone go into your mom's house. Big fella, didn't look right. I should have called someone, but I didn't know." "It's all right," Daniel interrupted gently. "Did you see where he went after?" Mr. Harris hesitated, then shook his head. "No, sorry, I closed the curtain. Figured it was none of my business." Daniel nodded, biting down the frustration that threatened to rise. "Stay inside and lock your doors. If you remember anything else, call the precinct." He turned back into the house, the weight of dread sinking deeper. Rex was at the base of the hallway now, nose fixed to a spot near the closet door beneath the staircase. The dog let out another bark, short and urgent, then scratched at the door. Daniel approached slowly, heart pounding harder than before. He reached for the knob, turned it quietly, and pulled it open. The faint smell of earth and old wood wafted out. A steep, narrow staircase led downward into darkness. Daniel flicked the safety off his gun. "Let's go," he murmured. Rex descended first, careful but quick, his paws barely making a sound. Daniel followed, flashlight beam flickering over the warped wood walls. The basement was unfinished. Margaret always said it made her feel like the house was sitting on something unsettled. Shelves lined one side with old boxes of photos and worn holiday decorations. A washing machine sat unplugged in the corner. Everything appeared undisturbed. Until Rex turned sharply to the far end of the room, toward the old storage crawlspace. He let out a soft, deep growl. Daniel's flashlight caught a faint glint of something reflective metal? No. Plastic. Tape. He stepped closer. The storage door was slightly ajar, and on the concrete floor lay a strip of duct tape, crumpled and sticky. Daniel's breath caught. He placed his hand on the door and eased it open slowly, silently, and his heart stopped. The crawl space beyond was dim, lit only by his flashlight beam. It was cramped, barely enough room to crouch, and in the far corner, barely visible under an old moving blanket, was a figure bound, unmoving. Rex barked, lunging forward but stopping short, as if afraid to startle whoever was inside. Daniel dropped to his knees, set the flashlight down, and reached out. He pulled the blanket back and found her. His mother. Margaret Carter, frail and trembling, was bound at the wrists and ankles, duct tape stretched tight over her mouth. Her silver-white hair clung to her forehead in damp wisps, and her eyes were wide with fear, but they blinked alive. Daniel exhaled a broken gasp. "Mom!" He reached for his pocket knife and carefully sliced the tape from her wrists. Her fingers fluttered like dying leaves as she reached for his face. He ripped the tape from her mouth gently, and she inhaled sharply, her chest heaving. "Daniel," she choked, her voice hoarse. They were going to take me." He swallowed hard, pulling her into his arms, wrapping her against his chest. Her body felt weightless, as if she'd been drained of everything except fear. Rex stood close, tail low, eyes fixed on the dark corners as if daring danger to show its face again. The house above was silent once more, but Daniel knew the quiet wasn't peace. It was only the eye of the storm. Daniel cradled his mother in the cold, narrow crawlspace beneath the house, arms wrapped around her trembling frame as if he could shield her from everything she had just endured. Margaret's breath came in short gasps, every inhale a struggle, every exhale a fragile plea for safety. Her silver hair was matted with sweat and dust, her once pink cardigan now dull and stained. The faint smell of duct tape and fear still hung in the air like rot. He wiped the corner of her mouth where the tape had left a red mark, his thumb shaking as it moved. "I've got you, Mom," he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. "You're safe now." But the word safe barely felt real. Rex remained alert, standing rigid near the entrance to the crawlspace, his body forming a protective barrier between them and the dark stairwell beyond. The German shepherd's teeth were slightly bared, not from aggression, but as a warning. His low growl resonated in the small space like a drumbeat. The hairs along his back were raised. He hadn't relaxed even after Margaret had been unbound. His ears tilted back and forth, reading the air, sensing more than Daniel could see. Daniel rose slowly, careful not to leave his mother unsupported. She was weak, barely able to lift her arms, but her eyes, those soft, cloudy gray eyes, held on to him like a lifeline. They knew you'd come," she whispered, her voice like sandpaper. "They didn't expect Rex." Daniel glanced at his partner. "Neither did they expect he'd still have a fight in him," he said, voice low. Then Margaret gripped his wrist weakly, surprising him with a jolt of sudden strength. "Don't let them win, Daniel," she said through clenched teeth. "Don't let them scare you off the case. That's what they want." He nodded, even though his mind was racing. Whoever had done this hadn't come to rob or vandalize. They had come with a purpose to break him, to warn him off, but they had miscalculated. They had underestimated Rex, and they had forgotten that Daniel Carter didn't scare easily. A sound from above. The unmistakable creak of floorboards cut through the silence like a blade. Rex's growl deepened instantly. The dog turned sharply, positioning himself between the doorway and Margaret again. His stance was aggressive, head lowered, tail stiff, eyes locked on the top of the stairs. Daniel clicked his flashlight off and drew his gun, stepping silently toward the crawlspace entrance. He peeked out into the basement. The space beyond was dim, shadows dancing along the concrete walls from the faint motion sensor light that had flickered to life earlier. Another creak. Closer now. Someone was upstairs. Daniel whispered, "Stay here," to his mother, though he hated the thought of leaving her again. But Margaret, ever braver than she looked, gave him a nod. She pulled the discarded blanket tighter around herself and leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on Rex as if trusting the dog more than the wood and stone surrounding her. Rex looked up at Daniel. There was a silent understanding between them, the same one forged years ago during their first case together. One bark would mean danger. 2 barks would mean to retreat. But now, Rex gave no sound, only focus. Daniel ascended the basement steps slowly, pressing his foot against each stair with practiced silence. He reached the kitchen, now more ominous than chaotic. The door was still ajar, rain dripping in a slow rhythm onto the floor. The fridge hummed, oblivious to the tension in the air. Then movement. A shadow shifted past the hallway entrance. Daniel moved swiftly, pressing his back against the kitchen wall, gun raised. He tilted his head just enough to glimpse into the hallway mirror hanging above the shoe bench. A reflection. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving slowly, confidently, as if checking the rooms one by one. He didn't recognize him, but the man was armed. He carried something long and metal, not a gun, but a crowbar or pipe. His clothes were dark, soaked from the rain. Daniel's pulse quickened. As the figure approached the living room, Daniel stepped out. "Police!" he barked. "Drop it!" The intruder turned sharply, eyes widening as he raised the pipe. But Rex exploded up the basement stairs with a roar. Before the man could swing, the dog launched himself forward, hitting the assailant center mass. The two crashed to the ground with a heavy thud. The metal pipe clattered across the floor. Daniel rushed forward, gun still trained. "Do not move!" Rex stood over the man, teeth bared, growling inches from the attacker's face. The man groaned. I'm not the only one," he spat, his lip already split from the impact. "You think this ends with me?" Daniel moved in, kneeling to cuff the intruder. "If you think I'm afraid, you picked the wrong house," he muttered. As he tightened the cuffs, the man hissed, "You're too late. The message is already sent." Daniel froze for a heartbeat, then shook his head. "Maybe, but so is mine." He hauled the man to his feet. Blood ran from the corner of the man's mouth, dripping onto his soaked jacket. He had a buzz cut, a crooked nose that had likely been broken more than once, and a scar over his left brow that pulsed red. Not a hired burglar, a thug with history. Maybe cartel, maybe freelance. But he hadn't expected Rex. They moved toward the front of the house, Rex staying close on the attacker's flank. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Red and blue lights appeared in the distance, the silent approach of backup. Daniel had hit the emergency ping on his radio earlier before he even reached the neighborhood. From the basement stairwell, Margaret called out faintly, "Daniel?" He turned back, voice firm. But gentle. "We got him, Mom. We got him." The flashing lights from the arriving patrol cars painted the wet street in red and blue pulses, casting dancing shadows across the front porch and dripping window panes. Officer Mike Rivera, a young, broad-shouldered man in his early 30s with short black hair and a square jaw, stepped out of the lead cruiser. His dark uniform clung to him from the drizzle, and his breath fogged the air as he jogged toward the house. Calm and methodical, Mike had always been the quiet presence on shift, the one who didn't speak unless it mattered. He respected Daniel like an older brother and often mirrored his serious, methodical approach to work. Inside, Daniel was crouched beside the intruder now, zip-tied to one of Margaret's wooden kitchen chairs. The man's wrists were marked red from the struggle, and his eyes, small, set beneath heavy brows, flicked between Daniel and Rex, who stood less than 2 feet away, unmoving, watching. The man had offered no name. Only the hissed warning before. "You're too late." Mike entered quietly, gun holstered, and offered a quick nod. "You okay?" he asked. His eyes passed briefly over the chaos Margaret, now seated with a blanket on the couch, her expression blank from exhaustion, the living room still in a state of disarray. Daniel stood and motioned toward the restrained man. "Caught him inside. Basement trap. Came back to clean up or finish what someone else started." Mike glanced at Rex and offered him a subtle nod. He'd worked around the German Shepherd before and knew better than to try a pat. "You think he's alone?" "No," Daniel replied, "but he's sloppy. Scared. That means he knows something." Daniel turned to the intruder. The man wore a black, tactical jacket generic, no insignia, with mud-caked boots and a small stitched tear along his sleeve. His build was strong but starting to wear, suggesting someone who had been in the game too long, possibly ex-military or private contractor. "What's your name?" Daniel asked calmly. The man stared blankly. Daniel knelt again, lowering his voice. "You're not talking to a rookie. You came into my mother's house. You left her tied in a crawl space. That's not just intimidation, that's personal. So here's your only chance to explain who gave the order." The man's jaw clenched. Then, slowly, he spoke. "You've been on something you weren't supposed to touch. The names you've been tracking, the crates in the warehouse, they belong to people higher than you can imagine." "I'll imagine it just fine," Daniel replied. "Try me." The man's lips curled into something between a grin and a grimace. "She was just leverage, that's all. Scare you off, slow you down. But it's too late now. You've already drawn too much attention." Rex suddenly barked once, sharply. He moved to the man's side and began sniffing aggressively along the jacket. Daniel and Mike both stepped closer. Then, Rex's teeth caught the edge of the inner lining just enough to tug. Mike raised an eyebrow. "He's got something?" Daniel reached in. His fingers brushed against a hidden pocket sewn beneath the jacket lining. He yanked it open and retrieved a thin black smartphone older model, screen cracked but functional. It had been taped inside, clearly not meant to be found unless things went sideways. Daniel handed it to Mike. "Get it to tech. See what you can extract." Mike nodded, already dialing a secure line. Rex sat back on his haunches, satisfied, tongue briefly hanging out, chest rising and falling steadily. Daniel glanced at his mother, who hadn't spoken since the rescue. She was seated in her old armchair now, wrapped in a knit blanket, fingers intertwined tightly. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes locked onto Daniel's. They carried questions, fear, and something harder, resolve. Daniel returned to the suspect. "Who sent you?" The man didn't answer. Daniel stepped closer, keeping his tone cold. "Was it someone inside?" The man's left eye twitched. "You're wasting time. You'll find out soon enough. Everyone's connected." That phrase echoed in Daniel's chest like a hammer. He'd suspected corruption in the upper ranks for months now. Files that vanished, suspects released without explanation, surveillance getting accidentally wiped. But it was the next moment that confirmed it. Mike, who had stepped outside to take the tech call, returned and leaned in. His voice dropped to a whisper. "The phone. It's got encrypted messages. Not commercial stuff, military grade. And get this, the sender ID is masked, but one message has a partial contact label. Chief R." Daniel's blood ran cold. There was only one man in their department with a title that began with Chief R. Deputy Chief Roland Marks, a man in his late 50s, sharp-dressed, soft-voiced, and politically connected. With his silver hair and neatly trimmed beard, Marks was the face of professionalism often interviewed by the press, lauded for his crime reduction statistics, and considered a future police commissioner. But beneath that charm was a figure that Daniel had always found too smooth, too calculating. Daniel's mind raced. If Marks was involved, the danger went far beyond one thug with a pipe and a warning note. It meant the case Daniel had been investigating had cut into a nerve someone very high up wanted deadened permanently. He turned back to the restrained man. "Your boss just got sloppy," he said, "and we're going to burn this whole rotten network down." The man didn't smile this time. Rain continued to drizzle in a whispering curtain across the windshield as Daniel sat behind the wheel, eyes flicking between the road ahead and the side mirror. The cruiser's interior was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the dashboard, casting blue shadows on Margaret's pale face. She lay wrapped in a thick blanket in the back seat, her breath slow but steady, her head resting against the window. Beside her sat Rex, the German shepherd silent now but watchful, his ears twitching with every sound beyond the glass. Officer Mike Rivera had already pulled away with the handcuffed intruder in the back of his own unit, headed for the downtown precinct. Mike had promised to initiate the data extraction from the phone immediately and report back as soon as they had something solid. It had been less than 15 minutes since the capture, and Daniel was still processing the man's parting words. "You're too late." His instincts churned uneasily. The rain had softened to a light mist, though clouds still hung thick above the hills as Daniel steered the vehicle toward the regional hospital. Margaret hadn't spoken since she was rescued. She was dehydrated, weak, and clearly in shock, though the quiet strength in her gaze never fully faded. Daniel couldn't help but glance into the rearview mirror every few seconds, checking on her like he used to when he was 8 and convinced she'd disappear if he looked away. At the first red light, Daniel finally allowed himself to breathe. He tapped the wheel, exhaling a slow sigh. "Almost there, Mom," he said softly. That's when Rex stirred. The dog, until now quietly pressed beside Margaret, suddenly stood, his nose twitching furiously. He turned sharply toward the floorboard beneath Daniel's seat, letting out a low, guttural growl. Daniel's attention snapped to him instantly. "What is it?" he asked, but Rex's behavior answered before words could. Rex pawed at the floor, then growled again, this time louder, more insistent. His body stiffened, tail pointing rigid, as he nudged at the seam where the front floor met the undercarriage panel. Daniel felt a cold prick at the back of his neck. Without thinking, he pulled the vehicle into an empty gas station lot just off the main road and shifted into park. "Stay here," he said sharply, eyes flicking between his mother and Rex. He grabbed the flashlight from the side compartment and stepped into the rain. The night had gone still again. No passing cars, just the hiss of water sliding off rooftops and gutters. Daniel crouched beside the cruiser, flashlight sweeping under the frame. Then he saw it. A rectangular black box about the size of a paperback, duct-taped to the bottom of the chassis nestled just above the rear axle. A red diode blinked slowly on its side. A wire, snipped clean, dangled loosely. Daniel's blood turned to ice. It was a bomb. A timed device. And someone, whoever had planted it, had forgotten to arm the countdown. Rex. That dog had just saved all of them again. Daniel stood quickly, heart pounding hard in his throat. He looked through the rear window. Margaret was still resting, unaware. Rex sat poised beside her, eyes locked on the side of the vehicle, tail now thumping softly alert, but calm. Daniel grabbed his phone and snapped several photos of the device. He backed away and called dispatch. "Control, this is Detective Carter. I've got a device under my vehicle. Looks like a timer-based explosive. We're safe. It hasn't been activated. I need a bomb squad at the Sinclair station off Route 9 immediately. My mother's in the vehicle. Uninjured, but shaken. I'm requesting backup and medical assistance." The dispatcher responded with a calm urgency, confirming units were en route. Daniel returned to the cruiser and gently opened the back door. "Mom," he said softly, crouching down so she could see his face. "We're going to get out and sit inside the station store for a bit, okay?" Margaret blinked, dazed, but nodded. He helped her out, keeping the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The store was closed for the night, but a covered bench sat under the awning, dry enough. Daniel helped her down and sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her back. Rex sat at her feet like a guardian carved in stone. Minutes later, the blue and white flashing lights of the bomb squad truck pulled in. 2 techs stepped out, already in partial gear. One of them, Lana Bryce, a woman in her early 40s with a sharp jawline, cropped sandy hair, and a calm intensity, approached Daniel. Lana was known in the department as one of the most meticulous EOD specialists in the state. She had served 2 tours in Iraq before joining the force and had a dry sense of humor that often surfaced in the tensest situations. Daniel briefed her quickly, showing the pictures and pointing to the underside of the cruiser. "It wasn't armed," he said, "but it was ready." Lana crouched beside the car, her partner standing by. After a moment of close inspection, she stood and removed her helmet. "You're lucky," she said, voice low. "This is military grade. Whoever made it knew what they were doing. But this trigger system, it's old school. Manual switch. He either panicked or forgot." Daniel nodded grimly. "He was interrupted. We caught him inside the house. My guess is he was supposed to arm it once we started driving again. He never got the chance." Lana whistled softly. He wouldn't have needed more than 30 seconds. Daniel looked down at Rex, who sat now beside Margaret, gently resting his chin on her shoe. He didn't get it, Daniel said quietly, because Rex wouldn't let him. The first light of dawn broke across the Colorado skyline, casting long golden shafts through the thin mist still clinging to the ground. The air held a chilled stillness, less the calm after the storm than the moment just before accountability arrives. Daniel stood beside the ambulance watching as the paramedics eased his mother into the back of the vehicle. Her frail form seemed even smaller under the hospital blanket, yet her fingers still gripped his hand tightly before the doors gently closed. He offered her a nod, steady, reassuring. She blinked once, slowly, and gave the faintest smile. Beside him, Rex sat upright, his fur damp from the long night, but his posture unwavering. The German shepherd's eyes followed the ambulance door as it shut with a soft click. Then, and only then, did he release a quiet breath through his nose, a canine exhale of relief. He remained still until the ambulance pulled away into the morning traffic, his gaze trailing after it until it vanished around the corner. Inside the hospital, Margaret was being entrusted to someone Daniel knew he could count on. Caitlin Dwyer, his maternal cousin, a registered nurse in her early 30s with bright auburn hair, always tied in a no-nonsense bun. Caitlin had inherited their grandmother's fierce disposition and gentle bedside manner. Petite in stature but sharp in spirit, she moved with clinical precision and carried the warmth of someone who had watched too many lives slip away to take anything for granted. She took Margaret's hand and, with one look toward Daniel, gave a firm nod that meant, "I've got this." With his mother now safe and under supervision, Daniel stepped away from the curb and returned to the command vehicle where Mike Rivera was waiting. The younger officer's eyes were red with fatigue, but his jaw was set. "She's stable?" Mike asked. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Caitlin will stay with her." Mike handed him a tablet. "Feds are online. They've got everything they need to move." Daniel tapped through the digital evidence. The decrypted messages from the seized phone were damning. Precise routes, manifest codes, times, and most important voice notes recorded during encrypted calls. Among them, one voice was unmistakable. Deputy Chief Roland Marks, calm as ever, discussing border movement schedules and eliminating interference. An FBI liaison, Special Agent Leon Mercer, a seasoned black agent in his early 50s with a shaved head, thick-rimmed glasses, and a deep baritone voice, had been looped in via video just an hour earlier. Mercer was known within federal circles as a ghost hunter. He specialized in rooting out high-level corruption and had taken down more than one polished figure wearing a badge. Pragmatic, meticulous, and unflinchingly composed, he had reviewed the intel in real time and moved fast. Now, just as the sun cracked through the clouds, Agent Mercer's voice came through the command vehicle's speaker. "Operation Iron Gate is a go. We've got DHS agents positioned along the county border. The convoy is en route now. We'll take them before they cross the state line." Mike looked up. "Convoy?" Daniel nodded. "They're moving weapons in 2 trucks, using farm supply trailers as cover. One of the audio files gave us the departure time and route. It's happening this morning." "And Marks?" "Already under surveillance," Daniel said. "Mercer wants him caught live, not tipped off." They exchanged a brief glance. The weight of it wasn't lost on either of them. It's one thing to arrest a career criminal. It's another to bring down a decorated officer. An hour later, in a narrow stretch of canyon road just 3 miles from the state border, law enforcement moved in. Surveillance drones hovered silently overhead. FBI SUVs blocked the highway while tactical units flanked both ends of the winding pass. Daniel stood at a mobile ops unit stationed on a hilltop, binoculars in hand. From above, he watched the 2 large trucks crawl through the mist, innocuous if not for the dark sedans trailing them like shadows. The takedown was fast and clean. As soon as the convoy entered the narrowest point of the pass, spike strips were deployed. The trucks screeched to a halt. Armed agents moved in from the trees shouting orders. 2 men inside the lead truck surrendered without resistance, but the third bald, muscular eyes Wilde tried to flee on foot. He didn't get far. Daniel watched from the hill, heart pounding as the last of the men were restrained. Radios confirmed it. The entire convoy had been seized, the weapons confiscated, and the drivers were already naming names. The final arrest of the day took place back in Denver. Deputy Chief Roland Marks had arrived early to the station, as usual, wearing his pressed gray suit and polished leather shoes. When two FBI agents entered his office and quietly presented their warrant, he barely blinked. He stood, nodded once, and buttoned his jacket. As he was escorted out past the lobby, he noticed Daniel waiting silently by the elevator. Their eyes met. Marks didn't speak. Daniel didn't look away. By mid-morning, headlines began to roll. Deputy Chief arrested in federal sting operation. Illegal weapons ring busted on Colorado border. Hero dog averts bombing, saves officer's family. But none of it mattered as much as the moment Daniel pulled up once more to his mother's hospital room. She was awake, sipping water from a straw. Her expression softened when she saw him, and beside her bed, curled up on the mat Caitlin had sneakily laid by the chair, was Rex, finally asleep. Before Daniel could enter, he felt a tap on his arm. Turning, he found Walter Harris, the elderly neighbor with white wispy hair and a wrinkled flannel shirt, standing nervously by the hallway wall. He looked older than before, as though the guilt had aged him overnight. I came to say I'm sorry," Harris said quietly. "I saw the man go into your house. I should have called someone. I was afraid. That was your mother. I should have done more." Daniel looked at him for a moment, then shook his head. "You told me the truth when it mattered." From inside the room, Margaret's voice called, "Walter?" He peeked past Daniel and she smiled. "You're forgiven," she said, her voice weak but warm. "Now go home and get some rest. You look worse than I do." The old man chuckled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. "Yes, ma'am." As Harris shuffled away, Daniel stepped inside, sat by his mother, and reached down to scratch Rex behind the ear. The sun had fully risen now, bright and clear, shining through the windows and into the room. Justice had arrived. Morning sunlight streamed gently through the windows of Margaret Carter's small white house, illuminating dust motes that danced like quiet memories in the warm air. Outside, the trees stood still, their leaves washed clean from the storms of the night before. The porch swing creaked softly in the breeze, as if the house itself were finally exhaling. Inside, Daniel sat in the old armchair beside the living room window. His uniform jacket was folded neatly on the back of the couch, and for once, his badge and sidearm were out of sight. He wore a plain blue shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands relaxed but marked by exhaustion. Across from him on the worn floral couch, Margaret reclined with her legs covered by the same knit blanket she had wrapped herself in after her rescue. Her breathing was steady now, her eyes clear though ringed by fatigue. She reached out with a trembling hand and placed it gently on Rex's head. The German shepherd lay curled beside her feet on the rug, his sable and silver coat slightly fluffed from sleep. One ear twitched occasionally, but his eyes remained closed, half in rest, half in readiness. Even now, in the quiet after all the chaos, he kept one paw on the world. Margaret stroked him slowly, fingers moving through the fur behind his bent left ear. "If it weren't for him—" Her voice caught, unable to finish. She blinked, swallowed. "Daniel, I didn't think I'd see you again." Daniel leaned forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to say it." His voice was thick, uneven. He looked at Rex, then back at his mother. "He's family. Always has been. I just never said it out loud before." Margaret smiled softly. "Now you have." The fire crackled lightly in the hearth, sending gentle warmth into the room. The scent of cedar and old books filled the air, comforting in its familiarity. Framed photographs lined the mantel. Daniel's graduation from the academy, a younger Margaret holding him as a child, and one new addition, a small, freshly printed photo of Rex seated beside Daniel in uniform, both looking directly into the camera with the same quiet intensity. The front door opened with a slow creak, and the sound of boots on hardwood announced a visitor. "Permission to enter the sanctuary?" called Mike Rivera, grinning as he held up a paper bag and a cardboard drink tray. His black hair was damp from the morning dew, his dark green jacket unzipped. In one hand, he carried a box of cinnamon scones, in the other two, steaming cups of black coffee. Daniel chuckled. "Permission granted, as long as that smells like breakfast." "It is, barely," Mike said, setting the items down on the coffee table. "Scones and caffeine. We deserve better, but I wasn't about to try my hand at your mom's French toast." Margaret laughed gently. "Smart man." Mike walked over to Rex and crouched, scratching behind the dog's ears. "There he is, the hero of the hour." Rex opened one eye briefly, acknowledged the gesture, then settled his head back down with a huff. "I'm not kidding," Mike said, glancing at Daniel. "That bomb under your cruiser? If Rex hadn't caught that scent, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. That dog didn't just save your mother, he saved this case." Daniel nodded, somber. "He always knows. I don't know how, but he does." Mike took a sip of coffee and settled into the chair opposite them. "You know, the guys at the precinct, some of them have already started calling him Sergeant Rex." Daniel smirked. He'd outrank half of them. Margaret leaned forward slightly. "So, it's really over?" Mike hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Marks is in federal custody. Every name in that network's been logged, tracked, and locked down. The trucks were seized, weapons secured, and most importantly, you're safe." He turned to Daniel. "You did it." Daniel exhaled slowly, but his expression didn't relax entirely. "We did it. All of us." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that comes after a long battle, not empty, but full of what was lost, what was saved, and what might now grow in its place. Later, as Mike left to return to the precinct, Daniel stepped out onto the front porch to watch the sun climb higher in the sky. The town below was just beginning to stir, kids waiting for school buses, joggers passing with earbuds in, the clatter of a garbage truck rounding the corner. Behind him, Margaret dozed lightly, a book resting on her chest. Rex had moved to the hearth, curling beside it. His chest rose and fell slowly, ears still faintly perked as if guarding dreams. Daniel walked over, knelt beside him, and rubbed the patch of fur behind his scarred hind leg. "You've earned a rest, partner," he whispered. Rex didn't open his eyes, but his tail gave one soft thump against the floor. Outside, the storm had passed. And inside, in a small home with creaky floors and warm light, the kind of peace they had all been chasing had finally taken root. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not loud or grand, they arrive on four legs, with quiet eyes and a heart full of loyalty. Rex didn't speak, but his actions were a sermon, a lesson in unconditional love, courage in the face of darkness, and faith that never gives up. This story reminds us that even in our darkest storms, God may send help in unexpected forms. A loyal dog, a kind neighbor, a moment of clarity. It's a gentle whisper from above that says, "You are not alone." Through Rex, a family was reunited, evil was brought to justice, and a town was reminded that hope still walks among us. In our daily lives, we often overlook these small signs of grace, but maybe, just maybe, the miracles we pray for are already beside us. Watching, waiting, protecting. If this story touched your heart, type Amen in the comments to thank God for the unseen blessings in your life. May the Lord bless and protect all who are watching. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Tell us, have you ever seen a miracle in your life? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and love. And remember, even one loyal heart can change everything.
She was a white German Shepherd puppy, pinned under a slick black log on the edge of Bayou Sauvage, New Orleans, and the current wanted her more than I did. The water was brown glass, shivering. Her paws were paddling at nothing, sunk in silt, like the earth had hands. I beached my canoe, heart clicking loud enough to spook birds I couldn't see. I'm not a rescuer. I'm not a volunteer. I've never even had a dog. But when her eyes found me, a bright, impossible blue under a mask of mud, I understood I was already chosen. The log shifted, the bayou leaned in, and I told the river it would have to go through me first. It was early afternoon, but the trees bent low and heavy, turning everything into swamp-colored shade. My paddle sank into the muck as I stepped out, and I nearly lost my footing. The ground here wasn't ground. It was memory foam made of decay and water. She was barely 10 feet away, but it felt like she was on the moon. Her white fur was almost beige now, soaked and clumped, and her back legs weren't moving. I whispered something, I don't even know what. Maybe to calm her, maybe to calm myself. She didn't bark, didn't growl, just watched me like I was her last page in a story no one wanted to finish. I checked the edges of the log first. Cypress, rotten and slick, swollen from days of rain. It had pinned her at an angle, high across her back, almost like a crooked roof. I couldn't tell if anything was broken, but she didn't even try to shift when I got closer. One paw twitched, that was it. Her ears were flat to her skull, and her nose trembled like she was smelling every second before it vanished. "My name's Calder," I muttered. "You don't know me, but I'm gonna try." The first thing that hit me wasn't the weight of the log. It was the weight of responsibility. I had no rope, no first aid, no experience, no plan. Just a canoe, a dry bag with snacks, a cooler, and a bad habit of paddling alone. I thought about calling the city shelter, but cell service out here was spotty at best. Besides, by the time someone came, she might slip further into the mud or worse. I stepped closer and tested the ground with my boot. The silt sucked me in halfway up my shin. I almost panicked. What if I got stuck too? But she whimpered, so soft it hurt more than any scream, and that was enough. The log groaned when I leaned on it. A few smaller branches snapped. She flinched but didn't move. I got low, crouched into the mud, hands on either side of her, and that's when I noticed her chest was rising too fast. She was scared, yeah, but more than that, she was spent, like she'd already decided this was where it would end. I couldn't let that happen. I didn't know how to save a dog, but I knew how to move heavy things. I grew up in Plaquemines Parish, cave around boats and crawfish traps and stubborn machinery. I backed up to the canoe and yanked off the lid of my Yeti cooler. It was wide, solid, and slick enough to slide on wet ground. If I could get her out, maybe I could float her to safety. Somewhere. A gas station, a bait shop, a shelter, anywhere but here. I took one more step, got low again, and wrapped my arms around the log to test how much give I had. That's when the current surged, and the log rolled half an inch closer to her neck. A German Shepherd puppy doesn't cry like you expect. The bayou swallows sound. It was just her breath now, sharp, uneven, and the quiet slap of water against bark. Everything else felt muffled, like the swamp didn't want to let the world in or let her out. I ran back to the canoe, fingers slick with mud, and dumped the dry bag. I always kept a coil of paracord wrapped around the seat brace. Never thought I'd need it for something like this. My hands shook as I threaded it through a notch in the log, forming a crude loop. The plan, if you could call it that, was to dig just enough behind the log to shift its center of mass and pry it loose. She watched me the whole time, eyes never blinking. I think that scared me more than if she'd looked away. I wedged the paddle under the log and used the paracord as an anchor, looping it around a knotty root behind me. The Yeti lid sat off to the side, muddy and scratched. That would be the stretcher, if I could get her out. I dug with both hands, scooping away sludge from the backside of the trunk. Every time I thought I had enough clearance, the silt just filled back in. My knees sank deeper, but I didn't stop. It wasn't even about her at that point. It was about not giving the swamp the satisfaction. She tried to lift her head once when I grunted. Didn't quite make it. Her ears twitched at the effort. I looked at the sky, gray with streaks of sun trying to punch through. Still early enough. Still a chance. I talked to her as I worked, just to keep something human in the air. "You're doing good, girl. You're tougher than me out here." I got the trench deep enough to slide in the blade of the paddle. I leaned my weight into it slowly, testing. The log shifted a hair. The puppy jerked. Reflex or fear, I couldn't tell, but she didn't make a sound. Her nose bumped the Yeti lid behind her. Maybe she understood. Maybe she thought it was over. "Not yet," I whispered. I pushed again. This time the log groaned and tilted just enough for me to see the water line drop behind her. The suction of the mud let out a sick little burp. I grabbed the paracord and braced with my feet, pulling sideways, slow and steady. The loop held. That's when the branch I tied to snapped. The paddle shot out like a slingshot, and the log slammed back into the trench with a splash. My foot slipped, and I fell sideways into the muck. For a second, I couldn't see her. I was coughing, spitting, grabbing for anything solid. When I looked back, the log hadn't crushed her, but the paracord had snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The German Shepherd puppy was stuck, not by the log, but by the mud that wanted to keep her. I saw it now, the way her ribs strained as she tried to lift herself, only to sink lower, like the earth was claiming her inch by inch. The log had pressed her down, but the silt had swallowed her legs whole. I wiped my hands on my shirt, which by now was more sludge than fabric, and dragged the Yeti lid over beside her. She didn't move when it bumped her side. Her eyes fluttered half-closed, then opened again. That was all she could manage. And still, she looked at me like she was trying to believe I had a plan. I didn't. But I had weight and will, and just enough desperation to try again. I eased the paddle back under the log, but this time, instead of forcing the trunk up, I dug a wider trench behind her. My goal now was to slide her free, not lift the whole bayou off her. She'd been underwater before I arrived. Even an inch of movement might be enough. I crouched low, using my forearm to test the mud along her ribs. It gripped back, not soft mud, not sloppy. It was packed, pressurized by weight and water. I pushed gently at her side, and the suction made a wet smack, like pulling a boot from a swamp. Swamp. She whined. "Sorry," I said out loud, voice breaking. "I got you. I got you." I wedged the Yeti lid under her chest, inch by inch. She was surprisingly light, or maybe just empty from exhaustion. The paddle lay across the top of the lid, and I used it like a pry bar, leaning it against the trench wall for leverage. It was crude, ugly, maybe dumb, but it was something. I took a breath, hands trembling, and counted out loud. 3, 2. On one, I heaved the paddle down and tugged the Yeti lid toward me at the same time. The log groaned again, but didn't budge. Instead, the suction under her broke with a wet pop. A belch of trapped gas and brown bubbles bloomed around her back legs. She gasped, just once. Her chest rose fast and fell. The lid shifted. I pulled again, slower this time, and her body inched toward me. The resistance was fading. The mud finally was letting go. Her tail dragged a dark line through the silt. I gritted my teeth and leaned back, arms shaking, pulling with everything I had. And then she was out. For one split second, her body was on the lid, belly flat, paws splayed like a newborn deer. But I didn't stop pulling, and that was my mistake. The angle tipped, the current tugged, and the edge of the board dipped. She slid free and immediately slipped deeper into the water. I hooked my forearm under the German Shepherd puppy and took the whole weight of the bayou with it. She wasn't heavy, not really, but everything around her was. The water, the mud, the fear. It felt like I was pulling more than just her body out of the swamp. I was pulling up something the bayou didn't want to give back. She slid against me, slick and shivering, her ribs twitching as I lifted her onto my chest. My breath caught. Not from exertion, from panic. Her back legs hung like wet rope. No resistance, no reflex, just there. Limp. "Come on, girl," I muttered, coughing through the taste of silt. "Don't check out on me now." I staggered backward through the muck, holding her like a half-drowned promise. The shelf was only 10 feet away, but every step sank me deeper. The silt gripped my boots like it was jealous. I almost lost her once. My foot slid on a root, but I caught my balance and shuffled the last few feet to solid ground. I laid her down as gently as I could. She trembled, barely. Her chest rose shallow and fast. Her ears were pinned flat, and her nose flared like it was chasing air that wouldn't come. I dropped to my knees and pulled off my flannel overshirt, dry, or at least drier than she was, and draped it over her body. Her paws were caked with mud, but I noticed her toes were ice cold. I rubbed them gently with the edge of the sleeve, trying to stir circulation. One paw twitched. Maybe it was reflex. Maybe not. The sun broke through the trees for half a second and lit up her fur. Even soaked, even filthy, she glowed white, like someone had sculpted her from light and left her in the dark too long. "I've got you," I said again, quieter this time. I crawled back to the canoe and unlatched the rope from the stern. The Yeti lid was scratched and dead, but solid. I flipped it upside down and used the rope to fashion a crude sling, looping around the handle grips and tying off lengths to form a harness. Not perfect, not stable, but enough to pull. I slid it over to her and gently lifted her front half onto the surface. She didn't resist. Her eyes half closed, but they tracked me, trusted me. I wedged a small branch under the front lip to raise her head slightly, then checked the rope tension. The whole thing looked like a mess, but it would have to do. I had no idea how far the next road access was. My phone was in my pack, and the signal out here was garbage. There was no time to think big, just time to move. I stepped into the canoe, still tethered to the bank, and began lashing the makeshift sled to the rear handle. 1 knot, 2, 3. I leaned forward to test the give. It held. She didn't whimper, didn't shift, just blinked slowly like sleep was pulling her under. I was just about to push off when I heard it, the low hum of an engine somewhere upriver, and then a distant rising wake. I turned and saw it rolling toward us like a wall. The German Shepherd puppy blinked up at me like she was asking permission to keep breathing. Her body was curled tight on the Yeti lid, back legs tucked unnaturally, the flannel shirt hanging off one side like a cape. I steadied the line between her sled and the canoe, then pushed off the silt bank with the paddle. We moved slow, carving a quiet line across the bayou surface. The current tried to drag us east, but I adjusted the angle, pulling her behind me like a promise I wasn't ready to break. The air had shifted, thicker, heavier. A smell I knew well from my childhood, ozone and moss, the early breath of a Gulf storm. I didn't speak. There was something sacred in the silence now. The water clapped gently beneath us, reeds brushing our sides. I glanced back every few strokes. Her eyes were still open, still watching, but slower now. Slower with every bend in the water. She looked like she was slipping into something deeper than sleep. I dug into the dry bag, found my phone, thumb shaking as I turned it on. 5% battery. No bars. I cursed under my breath and paddled faster, heart in my throat. I didn't even know where I was anymore. Maybe 2 miles from the launch, maybe more. Bayou Sauvage curved like a question mark, and I'd followed the wrong end. A half-mile later, 1 bar flickered. I didn't waste it. I tapped the shelter number I'd saved years ago but never used. It rang. Twice. Then a voice, calm, female, southern. Orleans Parish Animal Services. I said everything in one breath. White German Shepherd puppy, trapped under a log, maybe paralyzed, no vet. I'm alone. She didn't panic. Just ask questions. Is she alert? Yes. Still breathing? Yes. Do not try to move her any more than necessary, she said gently. Keep her warm, keep her flat. If she's conscious, that's good, but if she's quiet, that's better. Do you have towels? Flannel shirt. That'll work. Do you have a way to stabilize her? I've got her on a Yeti lid, I said, tied it like a sled behind the canoe. She paused. That's better than most of what we get. I half laughed, half choked. I don't know what I'm doing. You're doing fine. You got her out. That's everything. She told me where the nearest intake center was, not far from the launch ramp at Chef Menteur Pass. She said they'd be waiting, no sirens, no panic, just hands and help. Then she started to walk me through signs to watch for. Shock, labored breathing, pupil dilation, but her voice was already warping in the speaker, crackling. I'm losing you, I said louder. She started to say something about compresses, cool water maybe, or a warning, and then the screen went black. My phone died just as the shelter gave me the next steps. Inside the shelter, the German Shepherd puppy looked even smaller under the fluorescent lights. The shadows that had cloaked her in the bayou were gone, replaced by sterile brightness and the constant hum of old ceiling fans. Her white fur, still streaked with dried mud, looked paper-thin beneath the harsh glare. She barely moved as I carried her in across the threshold, just blinked once at the sudden sound of barking down the corridor and then shut her eyes. The woman at intake, Rebecca, badge on a green lanyard, stood the moment we entered. She didn't flinch at the mud, just grabbed a clean towel and met me halfway, guiding me to a steel exam table already prepped with pads. We've got her, she said, gently but firm. You're not alone anymore. I stepped back as they worked, arms still shaking, trying not to show it. A man came around with a scanner, small, quiet beep, and ran it down her spine, neck to tail. Nothing, he said. Rebecca sighed. No chip, so she had no name, no address, no one coming. They moved fast but kind, checking her vitals, shining a light into her eyes, testing light pressure on her paws. The back legs didn't respond. Her pupils did. That gave them something to work with. She never made a sound. She's about 7 months, Rebecca said, brushing her ears softly. German Shepherd puppy, for sure. Lucky she's got that thick coat. Might have saved her from hypothermia. Is she going to walk again? Rebecca didn't answer. Not yet. They rolled in a kennel, clean towel, soft mat, and slid her onto it using the same flannel shirt I'd wrapped her in. She didn't protest, just adjusted her head like she was trying to hear water that wasn't there anymore. The room behind me filled with noise, a Labrador retriever thudding against its crate door, a pit bull mix whining in rhythmic bursts, a young husky pacing in wide, looping arcs. In the next kennel over, a white Great Pyrenees lifted its head, 1 year old according to the note clipped to the bars, big, solemn eyes. It watched the puppy like it recognized something in her stillness. Rebecca handed me a clipboard. We'll put her on a stray hold. What's that mean? Legally, we have to wait a few days. Someone could claim her. Sometimes they do. Sometimes... She let the sentence die. I filled out what I could. My name, called her bro, contact, where I found her, how I transported her. I told the truth, that I wasn't a rescuer or a volunteer, that I'd never even had a dog. Rebecca didn't judge, just nodded. We'll get her stabilized, she said. But no clinics right now, not unless something urgent shifts. Warmth, stillness, that's the best medicine tonight. She handed me a care sheet, shelter-branded, laminated, outlining basic needs, fluids, position changes every few hours, low stimulation. I held it like it was a contract. Can I check on her, I asked. Rebecca tilted her head. You're welcome to stay a bit, but just know. What? If someone calls her in, it could happen tonight. A German Shepherd puppy needs a name if hope is going to stick. I tried Vesper out loud and her ear twitched, just once. But enough. Like some part of her buried under pain and fatigue wanted to answer to something, to belong to someone. I didn't know why that name came to me. Maybe it was the quiet way she looked at things. Maybe it was the hour. Dusk was leaning in outside the shelter window, soft and gray. Vesper just fit. She was dry now, mostly. I'd taken a towel from the bin and worked slow, mindful of her back legs. She didn't resist, didn't even flinch when I touched them. But she watched me, always watched me, like she was learning the way I moved. The towel smelled like industrial detergent and time. I sat cross-legged outside her crate and spooned a little water into a shallow dish. She didn't touch it at first. I dipped my finger in and tapped her nose. She blinked, then flicked out her tongue. Small sips, cautious. She drank like someone who knew what it was to go without. A volunteer stopped by, Liz, I think, and showed me how to use a rolled towel as a sling to support her weight. Just looped gently under her belly and hips, enough to give lift if she ever decided to try standing. I nodded, like I understood, but the truth was I didn't want to think about the moment she tried and couldn't. That was someone else's job. A vet's. A specialist's. Not mine. Still, I practiced the motion with the towel, holding it under my own arm, feeling the balance. You're taking this seriously, Liz said with a soft smile. Feels like the least I can do. Vesper slept most of the afternoon. I didn't. I took my phone to the front desk printer and made a basic flyer, black text, low-res image from when I first found her. White German Shepherd puppy found in Bayou Sauvage, approx 7 months, no chip, no collar. If you know this dog, contact Calder. I posted it on poles near gas stations, at the bait shop where I launched, and the community board by the corner store. I stuck one in the window of my truck and another on the bulletin board inside the shelter's front entrance. Every time I looked at that photo, it felt unreal. That dog, smeared in mud, half submerged, eyes wide, was not the same one curled in a crate behind me now, wrapped in borrowed cloth and breathing deep. But I knew better. She was still in there, still recovering, still somewhere between found and claimed. I sat with her as the sky darkened, reading off random names just to see if she reacted. Bella, Scout, June, Echo, nothing. Then I said Vesper. That ear twitched again. I was about to lean closer to say it again, maybe softer, when my phone buzzed against my leg. A new message. Just 5 words. I think that's my dog. The German Shepherd puppy watched the door like she could read names through it. Every time it opened, her head lifted. Not fast, not with hope, but with something deeper. Like she was bracing herself. Like she knew that whoever walked through might be the end of something. I sat beside her crate again, legs crossed, hand resting on the rolled towel, we used as a sling. I'd only used it once that day just to reposition her. She hadn't made a sound when I moved her, but I noticed her breathing hitched when we tried to stand. No pressure in the back legs. Not yet. She hadn't responded to the message. Not really. I'd replied, sent a clearer photo, even offered to meet. The number was local. Seemed promising. Until he walked in. He was tall, younger than me, mid-20s maybe. Hoodie with the sleeves pushed up, tattoos climbing his forearms. He didn't say much. Just looked at her and froze. Her name's not Vesper, he said, eyes narrowing. I called her Ivy. Vesper didn't move. He crouched and clicked his tongue. Ivy. Ivy, girl. Come on. Still nothing. She didn't blink, didn't twitch. That's not her, he said finally, standing. I thought maybe, but nah. Mine had a scar on her left paw. She'd run to me by now. He didn't sound mean, just tired. He gave me a quick nod and turned back through the lobby. The door closed soft behind him, but it felt louder than thunder. I stared at the empty space where he'd stood, jaw clenched. It hit me then, harder than I expected. I wanted him to be right. Wanted her to go home, wanted to believe someone out there had just made a mistake and left a gate open and this whole thing would resolve in a neat circle. But I also didn't want to let go, and that terrified me. I shouldn't be here, I said, voice low, almost embarrassed. I didn't come looking for a dog. I was just paddling. Just passing through. Vesper's eyes flicked toward me. I don't know how to take care of a puppy, I added, half laughing, half cracking. I don't even know if I can afford a second bag of food next week. She kept staring. And what if I get it wrong? What if she never walks again and I can't? Her tail tapped. Once. It was faint, barely audible above the hum of fluorescent light and distant barking, but it happened, just a tiny rhythm against the crate floor. A decision, maybe. A reply. A reply. I froze, afraid to break the moment. You wagged, I whispered. She blinked. I smiled for the first time all day. Not big, not long, just enough. I leaned back against the wall, feeling the air shift around us. A soft rumble rolled in from outside. The smell of wet concrete crept through the vents. The storm that had been hanging all afternoon finally made good on its promise. Lightning cracked across the sky, and the lights went out. In an instant, the shelter went dark. In the generator glow, a German Shepherd puppy and I felt like the last two lanterns on the Gulf. The storm had knocked out everything, lights, phones, even the old soda machine that usually hummed in the lobby. What remained was the low growl of a backup generator and the occasional strobe of lightning painting the kennels in white. Every flash froze the world, dogs mid-bark, water dripping mid-air. And in the middle of it, Vesper stared at me like I was the only steady thing left. The staff moved fast, practiced, flood protocol. A couple of the back drains were already filling, so they started raising crates onto blocks and metal shelves. Rebecca handed me a lead and pointed. Big guy needs a lift. The white Great Pyrenees down the row looked at me with mournful, patient eyes. I slid open the latch, crouched, and scooped an arm under his chest. He leaned into me like he knew the drill. Heavy, but not fighting, just trusting. For a moment, it was two white dogs under my care. The Pyrenees in my arms, the German Shepherd puppy watching from her crate. Both survivors of something, both carried by strangers. I set the Pyrenees gently onto a raised platform, scratched his ear, and turned back. Vesper hadn't looked away. Her head tilted like she was comparing us, wondering if she was next. Not yet, I whispered through the bars. You're safe where you are. I crouched again, close enough to see the mud still clinging under her nails. She smelled faintly of river water, even after all the towels. I wanted to tell her something true, something permanent. But all I had were promises I wasn't sure I could keep. I'll stay tonight, I murmured. I'll sit right here until the lights come back. You won't be alone. Her eyes softened. She blinked slow, like a nod. You'll walk again, I added, then caught myself. My throat tightened. Or maybe you won't. But either way, I won't leave you. The words felt heavier than the Pyrenees, but once said, they were real. I leaned my forehead against the crate bars. The hum of the generator filled the silence, thunder rolled, shaking the walls, and then movement. Vesper's paw twitched, just the faintest flex of a toe rippled down one hind leg. My chest tightened, pulse racing. You felt that, didn't you? I whispered. Another twitch, this time stronger. Her claws scraped faintly against the towel beneath her. Lightning cracked overhead, spilling white light across the room. In that split second, she gathered herself, Front paws braced, head lifting higher than before, she pushed. Her chest rose, her body shifted forward, her hind legs lagged behind. But she tried. She really tried. For one breath, it looked like she might pull herself up, and then she folded like wet paper. The German Shepherd puppy shook, then locked her eyes on mine, like standing was something we'd do together. Her body quivered as if the storm itself had taken root inside her, each muscle fiber buzzing with impossible effort. I slid both hands under her chest, steady but gentle, feeling the tremor run through her bones. "Easy, Vesper," I whispered. "I've got you." And then, miracle. She pressed her front paws into the towel, pushed up, and for 3 whole seconds, she stood. Wobbly, trembling, but upright. The sound of the storm disappeared, the shelter disappeared. All that remained was the German Shepherd puppy and the impossible thing we were doing together. She panted hard, eyes burning bright, tail stiff with the strain. I could feel the heat of her chest against my palms, the tiny engine of a life refusing to quit. When her back legs gave way, she slumped gently into the sling, but I was already smiling through a sting in my eyes. 3 seconds. 3 precious seconds, enough to prove something more than survival lived inside her. That's when the phone rang at the front desk, old rotary style, shrill against the hum of the generator. Rebecca answered, voice muffled but urgent. Then she came fast down the corridor, clipboard in hand. "Someone claims the dog," she said. The room spun. I looked at Vesper, mud-stained, trembling, still catching her breath from the stand. Could someone really just walk in and take her? Was I only a bridge she had to cross? The man arrived 20 minutes later. Different from the last, older, pressed shirt, neat shoes, a smell of cologne that didn't belong anywhere near wet fur. He looked at her once and said, too quick, "Yeah, that's mine." But shelters don't play on guesses. Rebecca asked for photos, vet records, anything tying him to her. He fumbled, pictures on his phone of a dog that wasn't white, wasn't even close. German Shepherd, maybe, but older, darker, no match. He insisted. She pressed. His story unraveled in under 5 minutes. When he left, the silence he left behind was louder than the storm. Vesper licked my hand once, like punctuation. Rebecca crouched beside me, lowering her voice. "The stray hold ends at noon tomorrow." I stared at the clipboard she slid toward me, papers tucked under a rubber band. Adoption application, foster agreement, a line for signature. "After that," she said, "she's either yours or she's no one's." I looked at the clock on the wall, 10:05. I had 2 hours to decide who I was. A German Shepherd puppy walked 5 steps between my hands on the same riverbank that tried to keep her. Her paws pressed into the damp silt, slow and unsteady, but each print stayed behind like proof that the bayou hadn't beaten her. She wobbled on the 3rd, nearly tipped on the 4th, and then, tail swinging like a pendulum, she found the 5th. I laughed out loud, the sound carrying over the reeds, raw and disbelieving. Just hours earlier, I'd sat across from Rebecca at a metal desk, pen heavy in my hand. The adoption paperwork was thicker than I expected, the kind of thing that makes you pause, read, reread. But Vesper was pressed against the bars of her crate, watching me with those eyes that had first stopped my breath out on the water. The shelter staff stood around like a quiet chorus. No applause, no big scene, just soft cheers when the last page bore my name. Calder Bro, 43 years old, signing up for something I never thought I'd do. When they handed me her folder, intake notes, care sheets, stray hold release, it felt like holding both a burden and a gift. One of the volunteers whispered, "She got lucky." I shook my head. So did I. We walked out together, her belly supported by the sling towel, the staff holding the door open like she was royalty. The Great Pyrenees down the row barked once, deep and slow, almost like a farewell. I gave him a nod. He'd find his person too. Back at Bayou Sauvage, I carried her down to the edge where the water smoothed into brown glass. No drama now. No log, no storm, just sky wide enough to hold what we'd been through. I set her gently on the bank, crouched beside her, and let her sniff the air. She tilted her head, ears perked, like she recognized the scent of survival in the mud. I didn't give a speech, didn't need to. I just whispered, I wasn't a rescuer, but I learned how. The words weren't for her, not really. They were for the man who thought he was just passing through in a canoe, not about to change his life. Vesper shifted, tested her paws again, and leaned into the rhythm of the sling while I steadied her. She wasn't sprinting, not yet. But she was here. alive, standing, and that was enough to redraw the whole map of what I believed was possible. The wind pressed against the marsh grass. A heron rose in the distance, wings flashing silver. I looked down at her, mud-streaked still, fur patchy in places, eyes sharp against the soft light of afternoon, and then she leaned, full weight, against my leg. Not because she had to, because she chose to, like she was signing something only the two of us would ever understand. A German Shepherd puppy pulled me out of who I was and into who I needed to be. I didn't set out to rescue anyone that morning. I set out to paddle. But compassion isn't a title. It isn't a job. It's a decision you make when you're wet, muddy, and scared, and someone smaller than you needs help. Her owner was never found. The flyers stayed taped to poles until the ink bled in the rain. But the shelter never gave up, and neither did she. They showed me what steady hands and quiet hope can do. They reminded me that every dog in those kennels, Labrador Retriever, Husky, Pit Bull mix, that white Great Pyrenees, waits on the chance that someone will care enough to stop and stay. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Their work doesn't happen in headlines. It happens in the slow wag of a tail that almost wasn't, in the soft press of paws on new ground. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. It's late nights at the shelter, early mornings with slings and towels, and the long road between found and home. And it's worth every step. If you share this story, you're not just sharing mine. You're giving another dog the chance to be seen, to be saved, to be chosen. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.